Aloha everybody, Doug here with Leaving the Dream. We have an update in the Mike Miske case as reported by civilbeat.org. Civilbeat has been the only news source to consistently report on this case, and they did so yesterday in an article written by Nick Grube, which will detail the extension of the Mike Miske trial, which I will get into in this video. I will leave a link to that article in the description below, along with a link to an article written by Ian Lind, which talks about Mike Miske's criminal history and his background. I found it highly informative, and I do recommend that you read it. Descriptions to both those articles will be in the link below. Mike Miske and his 10 co-defendants will not stand trial for an entire year. The trial has been pushed back till September 2021. You heard me right, 2021. That sounds unusual to you. That's because the Speedy Trial Act of 1974 established that a trial must commence within 70 days of the defendant appearing before a judge or his indictment being made public. It does allow for some exemptions, however, and that's what happened in this case. After numerous requests by the U.S. Attorney's Office to postpone this case due to complexity, U.S. Magistrate Judge Kenneth Mansfield finally ruled and declared that this case is so unusual and so complex that it would be unreasonable to assume that anyone can prepare to either defend or prosecute this trial in the 70 days allotted. This means that the final pretrial conferencing for this case will have to take place before August 16, 2021, and the actual trial start date, including jury selection, will have to start by September 13, 2021. The continuances that were allowed in the Speedy Trial Act of 1974 include considerations for certain things like whether or not it's in the best interest of the public and the defendant to push this trial back so that he can establish a defense, considering it's so complex, which takes into account things like how many people are being charged or involved in this indictment and how complex or unusual the charges are. So because of that, it was in everybody's best interest to push this trial back a year. All but 2 of the people involved were okay with this. Only 2 defendants objected to the 1-year ruling, and that included Norman Acau and Mike Malone. They don't want to wait a year for this trial, and the rest of them were okay with it. They knew that it would help them to build a stronger defense. It will also help the prosecution build a stronger case. So let's talk about some of the things that make this case so complex. The first one is the amount of defendants. There are 11 co-defendants in this conspiracy case. That's enough to make this thing that complex. But we also have how long this investigation took. Some of the elements of these crimes go back 20 years in establishing relationships between this group. So that in itself makes this a complex case. Another thing we have to consider when deciding if this is going to be a complex case or not is the fact that it was a multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional case that involved numerous agencies throughout the federal government and even the local governments. So just that alone, with the different agencies that have to communicate, that are using different laws, that were working together for resources, that made this a really complex case. Another thing we have to consider is the type of evidence that's involved in this case. It goes back 20 years. We're talking eyewitness accounts, we're talking about drug deals, we're talking about wiretaps, we're talking about physical surveillance. All these things are very complicated. I agree that this is a really complex case, and I don't have a problem with pushing this trial back, especially if Mike Miske does not get bail. On top of all that, you have to consider this COVID-19 pandemic is definitely complicating a case like this. If they were to rush this trial within 70 days, they could risk a mistrial, and the defense could also risk not being able to defend because they weren't able to prepare. One of the things you got to consider is this is going to require a big team. This was a multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency case. If it took multiple agencies to prepare a case to prosecute, imagine how many people it's going to take for Mike Miske to defend this case, which means he needs extra time to actually find lawyers and specialists and experts in the field if he's going to make an adequate defense. So all this was established on Friday, which is why if you check the court logs, there was no Mike Miske trial today, and most of the defendants have been wiped from the court log. But Catherine Kealoha is still going to be set to appear in court tomorrow. I think it's just telecommunications conference with Gerard Puana as the plaintiff. So you can still check that out as well. The next thing I want to talk about real quick is the Ian Lind article, which I left a link in the description for, regarding Mike Miske's past and his criminal rap. It was highly extensive. It's kind of a long read. but I would recommend that you go read that article. It does explain a lot about his past and the criminal history and his contacts with police, which is one of the reasons why the judge and the federal prosecutors made a case that he was not safe and that he was a threat to the public, and there was a threat of skipping bail because of his past. So I thought that that was very relevant. If you want to check that out, make sure you go do that. The Ian Lind article on Mike Miske's background was telling because it basically showed how he had been arrested so many times for violent crimes, but that the violent crimes were never prosecuted due to witnesses and victims not showing up to trial, which is one of the fears that we have regarding trials like this. Witnesses will pull out because they've either been bought out or they've either been threatened and they've been scared to prosecute. And it doesn't even take threatening. Sometimes people don't want to prosecute, people don't want to show up in court and appear as witnesses because they're afraid of retribution, whether a threat was made or not, especially in a case this big with a powerful person like Mike Miske, especially when you put the word mob boss in front of it. The prosecutors are really worried about this, as well as the public in Hawaii, because they know that there are people that have been afraid of Mike Miske for decades. Customers who were making complaints were scared. People who had lawsuits pending and victims of other crimes didn't want to prosecute in the past because of Mike Miske's threats. So going back all the way to when he was a teenager, we had crimes being committed, heinous crimes like beating up girlfriends or robberies or assaults, stealing cars, and burglary. And then when the witnesses or the victims didn't want to show up in court, Mike Miske got off on cases. And that left fewer cases to be prosecuted, which made his record look better. So the judges gave him leniency and let him stack cases and plead to bundles of cases for reduced sentences, receiving things like probation. So we don't want that to happen in this case. I hope that the federal government is doing everything that they need to do, which is why I'm glad that this case was postponed so that it can actually be a strong case and we can hopefully get justice in this case. So remember, I am not an attorney and I am not even a police officer anymore. I'm simply giving you my perspective as an ex-law enforcement officer with my understanding of the law and procedural cases in Hawaii. I figure I could break some things down for you guys to make it easier to comprehend. I realize that court jargon and legal jargon is sometimes hard to understand. So if you like this video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and make sure you ring that notification bell so that you know when more videos are coming up. Again, I appreciate all the support, and until next time, guys, be safe and aloha.